Okay, we're here to talk about Rebecca Harding Davis and her novel novella, Life in the Iron Mills. When Rebecca Harding Davis was 20 years old, she had her first novella published in the Atlantic Monthly. It was serialized, and the first part of it was published in April of 1861, the same month that the American Civil War started. Now, you would expect that her story might be about war. That's what everybody at the time was thinking about, the coming war that everybody had known about and was coming for a long time. But her story isn't about war on the battlefield. It has more to do with the idea of class warfare. It's very much a story about the imbalances between the moneyed class, or what Karl Marx would call capital, and the working class, which is what Marx called the proletariat. Here, we have a story of the lower class workers and their tragic lives under the thumb of the entitled wealthy people. The poor folk that we focus on are the Welsh workers, Deb and Hugh, of course, but then for good measure, the author also tosses in some Irish and African American voices, just so we know that the focus is the lower class and not necessarily their ethnicity. It's a somewhat predictable story, and it has some romantic elements to it. But the reason that we read this story in the literature class is that it marks the beginning of a new kind of writing in the United States. Rebecca Harding and many women like her were writing about their everyday lives and the everyday lives of the people around them. And the writing was often eloquent and witty and educated, and sometimes harsh and critical and judgmental. And it was breaking new ground in looking hard and close at the real lives of people. There are no clear types here. In the Romantic period, often the characters are types. They were always the pure villain or the pure hero or the tragic mulatto or whatever. There was never any complexity to the storylines and the characters. The characters in the romances tended to be more like symbols than real people. So Harding gives us a new way to appreciate literature. She shows us real people, and she shows us real social problems. And we, the audience, get to see these problems and these people up close. We see poor, struggling Deb. We see hardworking and artistic Hugh. And the narrator makes us feel for them. And we end up feeling great empathy, and we end up hoping for the best for them. So one way that the author shapes our opinions is through the use of the narrator's voice. The narrator is the person who walks us through the story, and in this story, the voice opens as if we're in a conversation. We're in a house, and we're looking out a window from a room inside the house. We look down, we see the town, the smoke, the river, all from a distance. And at times, the narrator speaks to us directly, as if we actually were in the room with her. Sometimes the narrator is there to guide us. Do you see the fog? And sometimes the narrator is there to guide or correct our ideas and make us feel aware of our privilege. Do you laugh at her? The narrator asks more than once, and referring to Deb. So the narrator is given a clear voice by the author, and the narrator speaks directly to us. This is an interesting approach. Then, too, the author makes good use of symbols throughout the story. When the story opens in the room, in the house, the narrator shows us the statue of an angel pointing upward, its wings blackened by the smoke in the air. There's also, if you notice, a dirty canary in a cage, clearly symbolic. Later, we'll see a statue made of the waste product of steel, and we will come to know her as the Coral Woman. And she's the creation of Hugh Wolfe, a man with as symbolic a name as you might ever hope. honestly. Hugh Wolf. And anyway, he's described as hungry and so on later. He's clearly a wolf. His name fits his character. These symbols all help to tell the tale of a kind of economic injustice that creates the wealth of the United States. The narrator tells us the details so that we can see how the workers lead these rude, empty lives, while the people who have the wealth and education and benefit from their work live happy and contented lives. But it's not just the wealthy. The author also takes a swipe at the church. As Hugh Wolf experiences the church in his moment of crisis, it's a place that he thinks should help people. The church should look to the poor as the very image of Jesus. It should reach out to help them. Instead, in this church, we get a fat and happy minister who offers sermons to fat and happy people, and the poor are looked down upon. And we are supposed to see ourselves in this critique. We who don't help the poor, who don't want to know about their problems, who don't want our lovely breakfast disturbed by news of some injustice that has happened. And so if there is a moral here, and I don't think that there is necessarily a moral, but if there is a moral here, it has something to do with how money rules in the United States. We, the middle class, have some, and we're always on the hunt for more. The moral seems to be that money is king in the US. Those who have it live well, and those who don't have to suffer. It's a far cry from the utopian society that de Crèvecoeur describes. De Crèvecoeur's letter is a call to Europeans to come to America and make your fortune. Rebecca Harding shows the seedy underbelly of society that we really don't want to think about. We might know it's there, but we don't want to know. So it's a work of realism before there was something called realism. In the 1890s, male editors decided to shift the reading public's choices toward a kind of literature that talked about the country's social problems and that moved away from the tired plots and the lame types that you find in the romances. They wanted a literature that showed America in all its varieties, from the Southerners who talk with a drawl, to the Northerners who were shrewd and inventive, to the pioneers of Michigan and Oklahoma who lived rough lives on the prairie. The United States was a place with a variety of voices, and realism wanted to make sure that they all were able to be heard. The only thing is that women like Rebecca Harding have been writing that kind of literature for years, and they had been doing it for over 50 years before the male editors even thought of making something of it. These women, the ones who wrote in this type of literature called realism, they were essentially erased. The men who came after them didn't really recognize their contributions to American literature, and they were left out of the canon. Rebecca Harding, who later married Clark Davis, was moderately successful in her lifetime, but she was forgotten even before she died. It was only later, in the 1970s, that academics rediscovered Davis and other women for their pioneering work that they did in American literature. So this is why we read Davis in the literature class. Her novel still carries the marks of romanticism in some ways, but it also tries to do something very different in its approach to the subject. In a way, this entire piece is an effective piece of rhetoric, from the narrator's closeness to us, the audience, to the development of the characters, to the social commentary that takes place. As you read this, judge for yourself. Does this narrative work well as a piece of rhetoric? Do we feel empathy for the characters? Do we learn to dislike the characters who might be heroes in another story? And how does the author's narrative shape our point of view?